All right. Okay. So I'm not the sales guy. So I'll go through this fairly quickly. I think you've seen some of these before. And this is so a little bit about the company. So we've been a leader in the enterprise architecture space for 18 years. We've been designed as an enterprise architecture tool from the ground up, and because of that, it is one of the now the leading enterprise architecture framework and tool used in over 2,000 companies worldwide. We have a number of offices worldwide, and today we're coming to you from the Sydney office, but we support the Asia Pac region, and we have customers throughout the region, and we have customers in Hong Kong. We support a number of different areas. So within your space, we do have a couple of clients who actually work in the electricity sort of transmission sort of space. So we have some experience with that. If we look at what other people think of the tool, we are a leader in the GartNet EA tool, and this is actually an older deck, but we are currently the #1 position in Gartner, and we're the #1 position in Forrester. In terms of the peer insights, so what enterprise architects think of us. So this is a insights taken from Gartner, and people have rated us 4.7 out of 5 stars by people who actually use the tool. We've also recommended #1 by a number of other areas, the CIRICOM, Pragmatic, and the Technical University of Munich, who do a lot of work in the enterprise architecture tool space. We certified for TOGAF. We work closely with the Open Group, and we're also certified with Archimate if you are looking to use that. So that's the current positioning. So you can go off and have a look at Gartner and make your own decisions about that. In terms of the critical use cases from Gartner as well, so they have 3 use cases, which is speeding time to value, bimodal enterprise architecture, which is related to using legacy architectures with new developments and making smarter decisions faster. We lead in each of those 3 critical capabilities. So we've talked about that. So with Abacus, we support a number of different frameworks out of the box, and we're able to actually combine and make hybrid models as well. So you've got a lot of flexibility to actually tailor a meta model to suit your organization. So we don't sort of dictate a particular meta model that you should use. We are about sort of tailoring any of these frameworks to something that's useful for you. So we use an iterative approach to the way that we do things. So we design for quick wins. So what we're about is not just creating diagrams. We're about modeling your systems so that we can get an understanding of how things operate. And from that analysis, then we can start to look at different solutions to the problems that we have at hand, and then we can communicate that to stakeholders. So we cover those 3 different areas. We can set things up very quickly. So we're able to, for a lot of customers, import data and get information out that's already sort of answering stakeholders' concerns in a very short period of time. We're able to analyze through, we have built-in algorithms that do some key metrics. So they cover cost, risk, performance, but we're also able to create our own algorithms. And we have a visual algorithm builder where you can actually go through and build your own algorithms so that you can start to analyze your system and start to work out sort of why different solutions are better. So Abacus is really built on this analysis and using algorithms to support what we do. So it's not about sort of, providing an architecture diagram that says, well, this is what it will look like in the future. What we're looking to do is to say, this is where we are today. This is what a particular solution in the future might look like. These are the metrics that we're going to use to look at what are the differences between the different architectures and why a particular solution might be better. So the result of that is it allows you to make better decisions and more informed decisions about what you're going to do. And also with the analysis, it allows you to define how you're actually going to get from where you are today to a target state. So we can do some road mapping and some metrics around that. And finally, we have ways of communicating that with stakeholders through, we have rich visualizations that you may have already seen already. So we have dashboards and we have different reports that we can produce as well. So I'll skip this one. Okay, so in terms of the main components of the tool, we have two main sort of products. One is the Studio product. So the Studio is where you do the architecture work. So that's where you load your components, you load your connections between the components and the properties of those components, and you start to build your diagrams, you start to use your analysis, and that's where architects spend their day-to-day work sort of looking at that and refining the analysis and working out sort of different options for improving the overall performance. On the top side here is the what we call the Abacus Enterprise, and this is where we present information to your stakeholders. So what we have is some HTML pages where we can actually present catalogs and diagrams and information that have been produced from the Abacus Studio, but also allow some richer visualizations and some collaboration to allow people to actually communicate what you're doing, and also to present information to your stakeholders for information that is relevant to them. Now, with this side of it, they do not need to know anything about Abacus. So it is just content that can be presented as dashboards to them. And we can allow some editing of information at that level, which will update the back-end Studios. So some stakeholders can make some changes to the data within the model, but they don't need to be able to know anything about the Abacus tool itself. So so what I'll do there is I'll just go into the demo part now, unless you have any particular questions on that. So
I was just going to say thanks, Peter, and I will share a revised copy of the slides, so the newer copy, as Peter mentioned. So I think it is fair to move on to the demo, and thanks for stepping in today.
Yeah, okay. So that was the non-salesperson presentation for you.
No, that was pretty good.
Okay, so when you come into, this is the enterprise tool. So what we need to do is, when we're working as architects, it's all about, designing sort of different states, but it's about communicating designs to your stakeholders. So we're always trying to address stakeholder concerns and address, particular questions that they might have. So we can do that, and we need to present that information in ways that is easily consumable by the stakeholders. And the best way of doing that these days is by rich visualizations. The thing these days is that people no longer have time to sit down and look at sort of detailed reports on what what changes you're making. They want to see sort of dashboards relating to their particular concerns. So when you come into Enterprise, And once you log in, you would be assigned to a particular dashboard. So if you're a strategy person, you might come in and see some visualizations, which this is a catalog here, which has come out of Abacus, and it shows all of the current strategies, the current priority, and the recommendations for them and cost. And this is automatically updated from the back-end tool, so that whenever this information changes, it is all kept in sync. What we can also do is that we can see that the total cost of ownership of different strategies, and we can see different bubble charts for total cost via financial ROI. But we can do a whole range of different visualizations depending on what you actually need. We can do things like, I'll just expand this one. So this is a tree map. So these are the overall strategies of the business, and we can drill down onto that, and we can see, well, what is underneath that. So we might have grow the business is split into technology innovation and business innovation. So if we click down onto those, we can see information underneath that. So we can see technology innovation takes us through to some departments that are actually impacted by that. So that would be a strategy type person. You might have an applications person. So the applications person obviously has different concerns. So if we had a look, for example, at the tree map for the applications, this one is a multi-country operation. So we could come down and click on Australia, because I know there's data behind that. And we can look at, for the applications, split into back-end processing and front-end processing. The size of the blocks is based on the total cost of ownership, and the coloring would be related to the current view of that application, whether it's retain, invest, or what's is tended to happen with each of these components. So once we go down, we could see, for example, this ERP marketing has a cost of 2 million, and lifecycle recommendation is retain, invest. The ERP HRM is refresh, migrate. This one here is retire, eliminate. So you can start to get a feel for what your portfolio is looking like, and you can then drill down underneath that. So I can see for that application, it's supported by a server and a Unix platform. Underneath the Unix platform is a number of servers, and I can see what the costs of each of those are, and those costs are actually flowing up to the higher level components. So we can see and understand in this one how costs are flowing through the system, and what the general state of the components is underneath that. And as you get down to the bottom, you get a Sankey diagram showing for this particular component, which is the server, what the incoming components are and what the outgoing components are. So again, it's a different type. It's quite a popular visualization, the tree map, but you can use it a number of different ways, and it's very easy to set those up and just to drill down to navigate different ways. So we can use them for for data risk, for example, if you wanted to see, for capabilities, having a look at what the data components supporting capabilities might be, what the particular risks might be associated with those. It's just a matter of defining what are the questions that you need to ask in your model, and how you're going to go about sort of building a visualization to represent that to your stakeholders. So if I can come through, if we have a look at information, for example. So again, we can have a mixture of different types of catalogs here showing the different data. With this data, for some users, there is they are editable. So I could come in here and I could change that from 16 to 24 if I have permissions to actually to do that. John will talk about the licensing of that later, but generally to come in and view the visualizations, it's unlimited to your organization. To actually come in and to be able to edit some of the data, you would have a sort of a smaller number of users who would have that ability, and finally you would have the studio access for people who are actually generating the models and the data. So I can change that. Once I've changed that, that will actually change the data. If I working with the different components here, for example, I can filter all of this information as well. So for example, if I wanted to have a look at the filter all of this information just to have a look at the applications of the technology. So you can see up here I now have a filter, and you might have noticed that some of the charts actually. So if I wanted to have a look at virtual applications, then you will see that the information on this, well, it's only supported by one server, but I can use that to actually set up filters, and I can filter on different different methods. And you can see as I'm gradually taking those off, the actual the filters will change. So the other one that we might look at is GDPR, because that has some data information on that as well. So I could just filter on the private information, and you can see these charts have changed, and also this catalog is only showing the catalog items or the components that are of a private nature, and I could you know, take that down to contractor and filter on that as well, and I'm only going to pull out one entry. So what it allows you to do is start to drill down and filter through the information as well for your stakeholders. We can also capture this information so that we can pre-configure some of these filters. So if you have a particular stakeholder who's only interested in one area, you could pre-define the filter for that person so that when they log in and bring up this page, they just get the information that's already pre-filtered for them. So we've covered the editing of the data. We've seen there's a number of different visualizations that we can do. If I go down into a test, for example, we can, so an administrator can actually set up a new portlet quite easily, or new dashboards. I can add a portlet here, for example. So I could add a, let's see, I could add a visualization here. So maybe if I did a pie chart, and I would just choose the architecture that I'm looking at, the component type. So I could say the application, and I could say, well, what is the, let's see if I pick a information type, and I'll just aggregate those. So I'm just going to count the applications by type. And here we are. So that's only 619 business and 449 support. So it's very easy to actually to go through and create new portlets, and to actually set up new dashboards for users. So is there any questions on that? So so with the portlets, just to go over it, we have different visualizations. We can pull out diagrams, catalogs, and matrices from the Abacus model. We can also link to Twitter feeds and YouTube. So if there's other information on your site that you want to display, you can see that information as well. So for example, here I can link that to YouTube videos there, or there's particular tweets there that you can use.
Okay.
We're also enhancing.
Why don't we stop and see if there's any question from the floor here?
Yep.
Not for me for the moment, but maybe after the demonstration, I actually have some question to my S&A team teammate. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Shall we move on to the studio?
Yes. So okay. So I've got the studio loaded at the moment, and when we come into the model, we have a number of different things. We can show the meta model, the architecture, and there are some dashboards, but this is a carryover from an older version of Abacus. And now these days the dashboards are used in the enterprise that we've just seen. So with the meta model, we have a meta model to define the type of things that we have within the organization. So there are different meta models available which we can provide out of the box. So we can use Archimate meta model, we can use BPMN, we can use, well, FIAF, there's some banking ones, is TOGAF, UML, Zarkman, SysML. So there's a whole range of different frameworks that you can use. And what you can also do is that you can create with the tool a hybrid model, so that you can bring in the best parts of different models to tailor something to your organization. So what we have is that we have a meta model, which is okay, which I'll just show you here, which is the evolution framework. So now the evolution framework is a hybrid model, and we use, most of our customers actually use that because it is a very good model, but we always tailor it to the stakeholder. So I'll show you that meta model in a second. So we'll just have a look here at this is the full meta model. All right. So what we have here is, it is based on the TOGAF meta model, but it has additional information added into it. So from the information layer, for example, it's a little bit richer than the standard TOGAF model. We have the connections to the technology, and we can add or remove sort of different components within that as we need. We have the application layer, and we have the so that's pretty much TOGAF sort of looking. When we get up to the business sort of layer, we start to include sort of more of the services. Now, although with the newer version of TOGAF, it does have more services embedded in TOGAF, but we support infrastructure platform and sort of business application type services. Above that, what we have is we've brought in at a higher level the parts of the BPMN framework. So we haven't brought in the full layer, but for some customers, they decide that they would like to go a little bit deeper, so we'd add in some extra components for them. Some customers just say, look, we're not interested in start events and gateways, we're just interested in the process and how they relate to capabilities and applications. So this is part of the tailoring that we undertake. So that's something that a hybrid that we've brought in from BPMN. We also brought in sort of the project area from P3O and Prince from the UK. So we can start to link projects and programs to different components. And finally, we have the strategy level, which is the business motivation model from the object management group, which is pretty much standard. And you can see that is currently making its way into TOGAF and Archimate sort of frameworks as well. They haven't adopted it completely, but again, that's something that we can tailor to the organization. So this is a fairly rich meta model, and this is what we call a level 3. So for a lot of customers, we start off with something very simple. So, and it depends on what questions you want to answer, but we could start with application, process, or in your case, a capability, and link them to service. And if we could load that up very quickly, and we could start to answer some questions with that. And what we do is that we would start to build up the meta model over time, so that you would start to enrich your model and then you can start to add more and more component types into your model. So we're only building up the model as we need it to answer questions. We're not trying to build a model that has all of your components and everything in from day one. We're trying to work at an iterative approach where we start with a base series of questions. We start to build up a model that answer some questions for our stakeholders, and then move on to the next set of questions, and then we might start building and enriching the meta model as we go along. So so it is and it is recognized as the most flexible modeling tool on the market, and it is very easy to actually add new components and new connections at any point in time. Now, the main reason for this is that Abacus, unlike most of its competitors, is built on a graph database. So we're not using SQL tables. We're using graph databases where we instantiate the objects and the connections at at runtime. And what that means is that it provides greater flexibility to actually make new connections to different components. And graph databases are great for areas where the nature of the queries can change, and the types of questions that you're asking of your model today might be quite different to what you're going to be using it for in 6 months, and it allows you to restructure and rewire things on the fly and to do really specific queries into the model. And that's the type of database that things like LinkedIn and that are based on.
Peter, can we actually move on to exactly how we start to build a model from scratch and like adding connections, creating the meta model, adding artifacts, adding connections, and
all right.
We want to see how easy to use the tools to build that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that very quickly because normally this is something that we would do at the beginning of the implementation. So say, for example, here I wanted to add an actor. So I've got an organization, I don't have any actors. What I would do, I would just come into my meta model as I'm a designer. I would go into my components and I'd say add a component type, and I'm going to call that an actor. Right, so that component is now available in the model. If I come across and have a look at the properties of the actor here, I don't have anything there. So what I could do, I could come up to okay, there's an actor there already. Okay, I could go to a department, for example, have a look at the properties for that. And I might say that some of these information, I might decide that I like those components. So I could go back down to the actor, and I could then just come here and paste those properties in. So with these properties, if I wanted to add one manually, I'll just say I'll give it a type. So the type is grouping them. So I might keep it under information, and I might give it a name of type. And I might say that it is with this, it is a list, and I might say that it is in the list, it's either internal actor or external. So that way I can use this then for validating. So if I was to come in here and set a default for that, it gives me a drop-down list. And I can also define that this is a mandatory field. So if you create an instance of this actor, you must populate this this property. So with that, we're able to create new properties, and you can create as many as you like. We can create by decimal or integers or text fields. We can set default values for them, and we can set whether they are a mandatory or not, and we can set provide list values as well, so that we can make sure that the data that is entered is consistent. So that's the actor, and I've added some properties there. So what I can do now is I can go down to a connection type. And so I've got an actor there, but how is it used? So I would come in and add a connection type, and I will just put a new one, sort of say performs.
Peter?
Yeah?
Sorry to interrupt. I just have a question. So
yes,
before you add the actor, actually see there's actor in some of the other categories, but so why we need to add the actors in the very beginning? Because in the people organization, you have the actors already.
I have used that one already. Yes, so I have actually added it. I hadn't seen I'd used an actor before, obviously, but I can actually just go in and I could delete that one, which is obviously I've left this over from a previous demo, I think. So that's why.
So you actually have that was a template. An actor is one of the template artifacts that you have.
No, it's just that I had created that component type previously.
Okay.
Right. So I'm just doubling up there. So the other thing is, if I create
I'm sorry.
Yes,
it's Victor. So I think that it's great that you open this framework and everything, but when you're starting doing this, for me, without knowing all these basic components that you have, I have no idea what you're trying to do. I mean, actor, right? Organization. What else do we have? I mean, I want to. For me, is I try to understand what's the basic building block that you have in these tools.
Yeah.
To me, so far, it's like, it's quite Excel oriented, kind of rows and table. But is it possible in this demo to explain to us a little bit of what's the component we're working with here?
Okay, so what you need to do is that, right, within your, if we go back to architectures, so architecture is about defining components and their relationships to other components to perform a function. So the function of the system. So that would apply to any type of architecture, whether it's building architecture. So the building architecture are talking about components for, windows and electrical wiring and things like that, and how they relate together to perform the function of a building. So within the enterprise architecture, more broadly, what we're looking at are what are the components within an enterprise. So typically, we have things like, so these are pretty much given for most organizations, is that we have applications and we have databases and we have servers. We have information either in data entities or physical data stores. We have processes, and we have people using those processes to support capabilities that might support strategic objectives of the organization. So the question is, as architects, how do all these components connect to each other, and how do they operate to perform a function? So what we do is that, as architects, is that if I come into CLP, we would look at and say, within your organization, what sort of components do you deal with? So so some customers, like, everyone's got servers and applications and that, but some have slight variations on them, and they have other things that they are interested in, or they have particular questions that they need to answer. And that's where we start to define what are the components that we have and how are they connected to other things. So, for example, we have capabilities which might be connected, used by an application. And that would support the question, what are my applications used for? I might also take that down to questions like, what if I have a risk within a data entity. So maybe it's private data. What capabilities is that supporting? So I need to be able to have a query then that says, well, if this data entity is used by this application, and that application is used by a capability, then I can map that back. So it's all about understanding how things relate to each other, to be able to see how they work, how they operate, and to be able to answer specific questions. So what
Good.
you need to define is, what are the questions that you're trying to understand?
Oh, then, okay, then now each of these, let's say you are at this infrastructure or information, within each of this area, I can create different components. It's predefined for us. We can kind of like, right click and add new. In this area, it will not be actor, it would be like a server, something like that. Is that this tool?
Yeah, so what you can do then is that you've defined in the meta model the type of component, and then you say, okay, I've defined a type of service, so it would be like a class if you're looking at UML. So you would say, I have a class of service, so it's a thing of interest in my organization. There are different properties that I'm interested for that service, so I might, and the usage is different. So the servers, I might be interested in what applications are running on it, what software is it, operating systems and technologies are running on that, so I can support that. I might be interested to see, well, what data. So once I set that up as the class, so I define the properties for that component, and I have that component type, and then I can go through and say, okay, I'm going to load all my hundreds of servers and supply that information. So I set up a application, I set up a type of application. The application, I have different properties. I want to know who the system owner is of that. I want to know of what capabilities it's supporting. I might want to know what servers it is running on. So that's where you define that. And with the predefined meta models, a lot of this is already set up for you. So then once you have that, once I start to create an instance of an application, so if I might put in the payroll application, I can say, well, this payroll application is linking to this physical server and it is supporting this capability. So that's where we start to link things together. And by linking it, then I can start to query the tool and start to get some, answer questions and do design on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so so with the connections, I just come through here and I can just add a constraint. And with the constraints, it just says, how is this connection used? So what I'm saying, I've created one called performs, and I'm going to say, well, performs is used to connect an actor to maybe a process. So I've come down here, right? So that way, the system now knows that if I want to connect an actor to what valid connections are available, it would know that it can connect to a process via this connection. So that's something that we normally do at the very beginning. So and then we just go through and we start to populate the model. So in terms of populating the model, we get into architectures. So the architectures is where we have different instances. So if I had a look at this one, if I have a look at your CLP load, for example, because I did load some information there, we have some components there of applications.
Hi.
So these,
sorry to interrupt. Is it possible to do an actual
load?
Just try to create a business capability or maybe called sales or something, and then with an application that is supporting this capability, maybe the CRM, and then what are the technology supporting it. So try to build a few components, like, or maybe it's supported by the SAP modules and something like that. So how do you utilize your template to create something like that?
Okay, so you can do it a number of different ways, connecting things up. So the easiest way would be to do a a solution diagram. So if it came down to your CLP load, for example, and I'll just create a new solution diagram. And so at the moment, I could pull out a component, or okay, we've got some components, some applications there. So I've got what's this? The Enterprise Work Management System. So with that system at the moment, I can pull out things that it's connected to. So I could connect that. So we don't have any of this data loaded, but I could say, well, this connects to a database and it accesses a database. So this might be the CLP DB01. Right, so there's that database is connected. I could say, well, that database, it might access a data entity. So that might be, you know, CLP customer, for example. So when I'm doing this, although this is doing this graphically at the moment, it is actually creating links in the model for this. And once I've created this, it is reusable, you know, throughout the whole model. So everything is integrated within Abacus. So once you create an object or instantiate a component, it is available in the model here, and it can be used in multiple different areas. So I can continue and add information visually, doing it that way. So that's an easy way of adding things. The other way that I could show you what I did do is I loaded some of your data. So if I come in and have a look at a catalog, so a catalog is a list of components. So okay, so I'm in the, right, so if I come down to your CLP load and have a look at your catalogs here of the application load. So what I did there is that I've got a list of applications here. So they're the names, they're the description, the application manager, and the link to the capability that uses it. So I can see that BPCM is used to manage asset information and analytics. Now, if I wanted to, I could come down here and I could just add a new component there. So I've got a new application there. I could give it a temp description. I could also link it. So I could come in here and I could use the connect tool to link it to a capability. So it knows that it is the application is connected to the capability via a user's connection, and these are all of the capabilities that exist. So I could say, look at it uses that capability. So I've just added a link that way as well. So when I loaded the raw data, so I used this spreadsheet that you'd sent me. So what I did is I created all of the capabilities using these 3 columns, and then I captured the applications, and then I used that link to link it to the capabilities. So I've already started to. So that's how one way of loading data into the model. But there are different other ways of loading data. We can use SharePoint, we can use ServiceNow, we could use Excel as you've just seen. We can use APIs from other systems to get data into the model. So there's number of different ways of getting information in. And what we're really trying to do is to try and to automate that as much as possible, so that the architects are not spending their day doing data entry, but they're doing modeling rather than connecting things up. So as much of this as we can automate, the better and easier it will be to use and maintain the data. So if I went back to one of these items, so if I had a look at the manage assets there, I could see if I click down from that, what actually uses it. So it's actually used by a number of different applications.
Is it possible to show in a graphical or pictorial method? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
you can automatically generate some kind of reports or dashboard, right? From this.
So what we can do is there's a number of things we could do. There's I'll do a new diagram, for example. So I could create a new diagram and I'll just use a solution diagram. Okay. And CLP load. And I'll do that number 2 because I've already got one. So what I want to do here is that I've loaded all these capabilities. So what I can do is that I can just drag those out onto a diagram. It's asking me whether I want the next level of subcomponents, and I'll just lay that out in a grid layout. Okay, so these are all of the capabilities that you have now. So if I wanted to have a look at this one, for example, I could create a drill down on that, and I'll do a solution diagram. And okay, so what that is showing me is that the Manage Assets and Information Analytics is actually connected to a lot of different applications. And in the next release that we've got coming out in Enterprise, we've got a new way of actually visualizing that. So that will allow you to drill down and show a nicer visualization on a nicer way of navigating through that to show the actual connected components. Because I could go from that, I could go then down to another component. So if I did a drill down on this one, it's probably not going to be connected to much. So yeah, it's only connected back up to the capability. But if it had servers and things like that or data underneath that, you could actually go through and continue querying down and seeing how things are connected. So where that is particularly important is that if you're doing impact analysis, so if I wanted to see for a particular data item, where is that used within the organization, I can actually go through and create the visualization to see what the connections are, and I can continue feeding those through. The other thing that we can do is that we do have some reports. So if I show you some that we've generated before, we have these world according to type of reports that we can generate quite easily. So if we had these application landscapes, for example, so if I click on this one, so this has a range of different diagrams. So it shows for the particular department what applications they're currently using, and we can also do that from solution diagrams as well. So we might come down to there's quite a lot of them, say the CMDB, and we could see that the CMDB interfaces with these applications, uses these platform services, so the operating systems, the database servers that it uses, the infrastructure underneath that, and the capabilities that it is supporting. So we can set these reports up to run. So again, it's depending on what how you want to navigate through, but we can generate these diagrams automatically, and we can schedule them to run periodically through a script. So you could run them, every day or every month or whenever you like to schedule it to create these diagrams. So that's another way of creating the visualization of how things are connected. But again, it depends on getting back to what sort of questions you're looking to answer with the tool.
Okay. All right. So can you actually show us how maybe you start by creating a project and then also try to create a target architecture for planning and also conduct an impact analysis.
Yeah, okay. So what you would do is, you see here we have, with the architectures, we have multiple architectures. So generally you might have your production as is architecture, and you might have an ideation type architecture. So for example, with this production architecture, I could create an evolution of that, which is just essentially a copy of the architecture. So if I wanted to explore sort of maybe moving infrastructure into the cloud, so I would say this is just an ideation. So I would have a look at what is my cloud project. Well, it's not a project yet, hasn't been approved. So what I have within this is that I have a complete copy of my production architecture. So I have certain diagrams that are in this. So I might go into my applications to infrastructure diagram, and here I've got a number of servers here. So what I could do here is I could say, well, with this website here, I'm going to instead attach it to a new platform service. So it requires a platform as a service. So it might be it might be a Azure platform. And what I can then do is with these servers here, where it is currently hosted, this application is hosted on that server, I can just rewire this in this application, and I can start to reattach these servers. So I'm actually changing the model now to tell it that the applications are going to be changed. So I would go through and I would do that. Now, if I was doing this in practice, there's a lot more that I would change than just to create a new service and drag a few servers around. So what I would do with these servers that I've detached them now is that I could delete them from the architecture. It's telling me that it's used in all these other places, diagrams, that's fine. And we're deleting the connections. Now, what we can do with that now is that I've got a different architecture, which now looks different from the current state. Now, if I went into this platform as a service, if I had a look at the properties of that, well, I might come in the financial and say, well, I've got an OPEX value here now of, $300,000. These servers that I deleted may have had their own OPEX, which deleting them from the architecture has now removed that cost. So the cost between the different solutions looks different. So we might also have impacts on the support processes. So there might be people who are actually supporting the servers. So there might be costs involved with that. There might be a lot of other components that would be impacted by changing the server. So so this is really oversimplifying the change, but what I'm trying to get across is that what we're doing is that we're actually ripping apart the architecture and rewiring it to show a different alternate solution. So what I could do is that I would be able to show a difference in the cost between these different architectures, but I might also have other properties as well. I might be looking at reducing complexity, so I could do some measurements on that. And I can run different analysis there. I can run the financial algorithm, which will go through and will check the costs. It is quite a complex model this demo one that I've got, so it probably won't show up a major difference in cost, but I could also look at the difference in complexity between the architectures. So that way, what I would be able to show is that not only by reducing these servers and moving to a platform as a service, I could show what it will look like in terms of the infrastructure sort of diagram, but I could also quantify what the cost savings, well, hopefully a cost savings will be, but also what some of the other metrics will be to support that.
Just a quick question
Yes?
about the financial model and the complexity calculation that you ran. Is that something that you can build on the algorithm that you mentioned? There's an algorithm tools, right?
Yeah, look, there's different algorithm tools that we have. So these are inbuilt algorithm tools, but we also have some, you can write scripts to do different things. So these are Visual Basic scripts. So some customers like to write their own scripts to do different calculations, and we provide some basic samples. So so there are some here, for example, that do APM type calculations, but we also have some visual algorithms, and this allows designers to actually build algorithms without writing any code. So I don't know whether you've looked at this. So what we can do is that I could come into the Visual Composer, and I could I'll just view the algorithm blocks for that. All right, and okay, I'll just clean that up a bit. Oh, okay.
Meanwhile, is there any question from the floor?
Yeah, I'll just restart that.
About the cost, actually, how we can get a more easy way to construct or fit in those data, because like different product, they have different pricing, and some actually can't even get from the API.
Yeah, look, John will talk to you later about how the prices are structured. So I don't know, do you want to cover that now, John, or?
I think it's better if we have that discussion offline, because it's more a thing of after you've had an opportunity to review this, we can, or CLP can decide exactly what you want by way of functionality, and then it makes sense to go, okay, this is the total cost of these various options, sort of thing.
Yeah.
No, I think Philip's question is more about integration of how do we get information from other systems. Like that was financial, and then I would, if you guys want to cover, I would like to know.
Oh, right.
Okay.
With other products like ServiceNow and so on, you know. But that's what the question
right.
was.
Okay. So there are different ways of doing it. So if I have a look at the tools now, we have a SharePoint and ServiceNow syncs. So with those, if I click on ServiceNow, what we're doing is setting up different links with synchronizations with different pages within SharePoint. And similarly, we can set up things with the ServiceNow so that we can pull in data from ServiceNow. So we work out the ServiceNow table, and we just map the data back into Abacus. So that way, so if you have data within ServiceNow or SharePoint, we can just sync that data so that so it will be populated within Abacus automatically. We do have some APIs for other ways of getting data into the system, and also it depends on how the data can be exported from other applications. We have an open API for Abacus, so we publish all of that so that there is an API both to update and to extract data from Abacus, so it's bidirectional. So if you can get an API out of another application. There might be some API scripting to actually do the mapping for that, but you certainly that can be done. In some cases, with some tools, we already have done that for certain products, and we might be able to get you started more quickly with that. So with the one of the things with the tool as well is that we have the. I'll just move that across. Okay, just sync that a bit. So within our help system, we provide this Abacus Academy, and that actually provides a lot of help on how to do different things. So there's things like how to get started, how to use the visual composers, how to use the algorithms, but also there's information on the APIs which are embedded in here somewhere. So I could do a search on that, and we could find the API. So there's lots of examples of the REST API and how to use that. So there's lots of information already available, so that we would like you to be able to become self-sufficient in terms of your use of Abacus. So we provide lots of information to support you with that. But of course, we're available to help you get started at the beginning. So right, so.
Well, I understand. Can I ask one more question on?
Sure. Yeah.
I think the basic getting information from, let's say, for example, ServiceNow, you can get the CMDB information for certain server or technology and so on. But how about the as we actually have defined some relationship between technical service and some business service and also application service? We already have some relationship in our ServiceNow tables. How does this, is it when you transform actually or whatever to your system, is it, can we have those relationships, established as well?
If you've set that up using the standard ServiceNow, you should be able to create those links. So if I showed you, for example, let's see, I'll show you the CLP load, for example. So we had the catalogs. Okay, let's see. I'll just. So what we can do with the okay. So in order to load data, perhaps I'll show you how we loaded the data. So.
Yeah, I think that the question is quite simple, right? Because I think that as far as I understand so far, you have components and then you have type of connections. So I think we have the in ServiceNow we have connection informations, like type of connection informations. That how does that synchronize to your platform? I mean, and if it support, because I think each individual components definitely support it. And then when it comes to a relationship between components, which is I think similar to your connection type connector. So how does those get synchronized?
Yeah, so normally how it would work, if I would explain it using a catalog, is that within the components that we've loaded, we have different properties, but we can also store information about the actual connection. So, for example, this list of applications has information about the applications here, but it also has the information about these connections here. So, if I store that information in that column, it will automatically create that connection. So from ServiceNow, if we know what that connection is and we can map that to the connection property of the component, we can automatically create those connections. So we have customers who actually who do that to actually load the connection information.
Is it out of the box? I mean, like it recognize the kind of relationship that was established on ITSM and directly on your Abacus tools, you just automatically mapped.
Yeah, what you have to do. So the ServiceNow is sort of is an extension to the base Studio product, which John will go into later, because not all customers are interested in the APIs and the interfaces like that. So so we bundle those separately. But once you set that up, what you do is that you set up a mapping from ServiceNow to a component within Abacus, and you map the properties between the ServiceNow and Abacus, and you map the connections as well. So that once you have that, then that will be that will import that information from ServiceNow. So there is some setup. So if you buy the ServiceNow sort of connector, it will have the API already prepared, but all you need to do is, and you only do it once, is to do the mapping between the properties in ServiceNow and the properties within Abacus and the connection information.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And there's always other ways of getting data in. The easiest way of getting data into initially for a lot of customers is just to use an Excel import, and that's where we can we export the information out to an Excel spreadsheet. So so for example, if I had a look at your Explorer, let's see, I'll have a look at your CLP load. All right, okay. So if I went into the CLP load and I can import data straight into that architecture. What I can do there is that if I insert a new catalog, okay, so if I came down to my CLP load and I'm looking for a component type of application, so it's going to give me a list of all of the applications, and I can come here and I can pull out, there's lots of properties because I use the standard set, but I could pull out the attachments, so I could put the capability that it uses, and I think there was also a property for the information for the I think it was no, it wasn't support. So I could put it's not that, but I will use this one as an example. So I can, with that information, I can export that to Excel and catalog. I'll just call it catalog too.
Since I have Peter, since we are going into this a little bit, how about because other than ServiceNow, because other I would call it more black box for a lot of organization is the enterprise integration platform, the enterprise bus, right? We connect everything to the bus. Does people actually, how does people extract information from the bus? Like, because they have API, I think they have stuff that you can extract information from. Then we can see, because at the end of the day, we want to find out the dependency or relationship between applications, right? How do they communicate? How do they pass data? So how does people do that? For if the connection is actually in the enterprise bus, the lines and so on. Does people extract that and put it in your platform? And how do they do?
Well, a lot of people, get that information from their CMDB. So some of the CMDBs will have, the crawlers that will go through the network and find out what's there, and that information can be passed via an API to Abacus.
I think it's a little bit more because we have information in the CMDB, but in reality, actually, if we want to like cost tracking, right? So because when people implement this kind of bus, they sometimes they change. More exaggerated is on a daily basis, right? So how do we know that the change happens and then update our CMDB and so stuff like that?
Yeah, well, okay, that gets into sort of the architecture governance. So, so what you're really looking at there is trying to align your models with the reality. So there's two ways of doing that with the governance. One is to do it from a data viewpoint, so that you're pulling data across from a CMDB, which will give you a picture or snapshot of what it would look like. But the other thing is that when you're doing the implementation of components, so if you're using release management, so an ITIL release management, for example, then one of your steps would be to ensure that your model is kept up to date. So so you're reflecting in your model the changes that are occurring in production. So that's a governance step. So if you use ITIL sort of release management, then a lot of customers then sort of change their process that the initial evaluation of a project is done using the Abacus tool, so that you can come through. So normally what happens is you have your architecture, which is your current state. Someone comes along with an idea and says, well, can we save costs or something by doing this? So what you would then do is you would go through and you would do an ideation, which I showed you before, where you might start ripping and replacing and rewiring things and seeing what that would look like. And you could present that to stakeholders and say, yeah, look, I've, in this case, ripped out all these servers and I've replaced it with an Azure platform as a service, and we're going to save X amount of dollars per year for doing that, and our reliability is going to improve. So at that stage, then the stakeholders would say, okay, that sounds like a good project. We'll give you some money, go off and implement that. And that's where you would start to use your methodologies or your TOGAF methodologies to actually help run that as a architectural project, which the the projects are actually going to go off and implement. But when they implement,
I think I'm actually asking a different questions. Like, I think we initially you start a project, right? You have your diagram, you have the architecture all defined, and we implemented it, right? So then the challenge of this kind of tools is, well, we have change. Due to change, sometimes it's a project, sometimes it's not. Then they will change the technical interfaces connections, and then they will, for instance, right. So there's change that it happens, technically, on the configuration level. So okay, we mentioned that ServiceNow have a CMDB. So and if we can get relationship between application and also all the components, update over there, you guys can take. That's one of the governance. But you know what when I'm mentioning the enterprise bus, because this is another black area that people can change the configuration in the enterprise bus, and then the application will act differently, because that connection between one to another is actually in that configuration. So so how I just want to see what else if we have API capabilities, in that bus. So when we call with your tools, call the API. Let's say let's get a latest mapping, of the bus, and then it's not aligned with whatever we have in your tools. So that is the governance part I'm talking about. Like,
so what?
How does people deal with this? Because I think that's the major challenge. We have some tools before, and the tools actually never get updated. I mean, I'm just talking about technical.
Okay. So what? Okay, what you can do is how some customers deal with change is that if you can get the API to notify that there has been a change, what you can do is that all of the components are time-stamped with any changes or updates. So what you could do then is that you could run a query or even a catalog to say, show me all of the things that have changed. And a lot of customers do that. They, particularly initially, like to see what's changing within this model, because I want to, as a chief architect, I want to know what people are changing within the system.
So I think I'm sorry to, I want to get to the bottom of this. Does people, because one of the practice we can do is like API, management, right? So we kind of enforce our internal colleagues. You have to put some hook in our API code to update you whenever, when it's operating, runtime basically. Then that's one way of I say very effective to have this kind of code practice, in our API coding. And then and that's people. Do you guys have something that we can just put? Okay, this piece of code you put in there. Then this is the hook that we have for your tools. In our API practice, basically.
We don't have the hook within those tools, but if you can bring information through that API into Abacus, we could, if we have that component registered, we could identify that there has been a change made to that component.
Okay, so basically we kind of work with our internal solution architect and ensure that we get familiar with your API, and then how do we interact with you, and then to develop that piece of hook, right?
And that's why I was saying there's two levels of the governance. One is the systems hub where we're passing information over through an API, but the other is the controls that you have about how things are done. So that's they do require a hook so that we can manage it. Because if you don't have the governance how people do things and control that, people can do anything.
So basically that we develop our own piece of code as a standard, and then we put that in there. Maybe it's a call to update you every 7 days or whatever, right? So ensure that we still have the valid connection within certain enterprise platform that we're using.
Yeah, so we could see that if that was changed, we would be able to identify that you could run a report and say, well, these are the APIs that have been, or sort of the information that have been updated in the last 7 days.
Okay.
And who and who did it? Or well, actually, if you can pass that information over, then someone can see, well, whether that's something that they want to follow up on or not.
Yeah.
But it's part of the governance. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So anything else that you'd like to see? Because I've been jumping all over the place. Sorry,
Ken Chow, data architect. I have a question on the tools. Is the tool target for all the architects, or the tool also targeting for the application developer or the project lead?
It is it's more for the architects. So so it depends on what level that you want to get down to with the tool. So, and this is how you want to separate the data within the model. So so that would be if you're familiar with sort of TOGAF, where they talk about architecture segmentation. So at one level, you have the enterprise sort of architecture, where you're interested in how components broadly connect across the architecture. So it's a very high level, but very broad view of the enterprise. And then you have down at the lower levels of segmentation, you have sort of the solution or project architectures, which are very detailed.
And this is the where the question is coming from. Actually, seems like the product have the capability in document the existing artifacts for the architectures, which is good. And I'm thinking, how can we make use of the tools which can place the control on the architecture, just like to make sure the adhesive of the implementation type with the architecture. I'm just thinking, would it be a segregation of duty between two group of people, just like the architect? We are more focusing on the something logical and defining the capability, defining the logical architecture, and afterwards the project lead and the application developer, they work on the actual implementation. And somehow in between, we are glad to see something linking up the logical and the physical together, so that based on this, and then we can spot out what are the actual logical being implemented and what are the actual logical not yet being implemented, so that we can have a bigger picture on the architecture implementation. Could you share something on in this area?
Yes, so so that gets back to the architecture segmentation. So it depends on, generally we look at a component, what information do we need or is of interest, or who is interested in that particular component. So when you get down to, you know, a application at a high level, in many cases at an enterprise level, you're only interested in the application as a whole. But underneath that, the solution architects or the detailed designers are actually looking at the different modules and all of the different instances of that. But for those particular components, if no one else outside of that particular team is really interested in that sort of detail, then what you can do is that you can segment that so you keep that in a separate architecture. So what you might then have is, as you were alluding to, is that you can come down to in one architecture, an enterprise architecture, come down to a logical, or even maybe getting down to sort of a physical architecture. But then if you want to get down into detailed design, you might decide that I want to use SysML or UML or Archimate to do the modeling of that. So I want to use a different way of representing that. So I might do that in a different in a different architecture, because those components are only of interest to a particular area. So in some areas, for example, in business BPMN. So in some areas, some customers say, look, in my architecture models, I'm only interested in level 0 to level 2 BPMN. If I want to go, I go down to level 5 processes in the organization, but no one apart from the business process team is interested in levels 3, 4, or 5. So what they do is that they have one architecture which goes down to level 2, business process, but then if they want to go down further, then they have a separate architecture which has the full BPMN notation, and then they can do the really detailed design implementations within that architecture, and that's just using the architecture segmentation to address that. So it's a similar thing to application architecture. You have to decide at what point do you sort of separate things into a different area, and generally the way that you decide that is, of those components, what stakeholders or who is interested in those particular components. So if it's only in a certain area, and if it's requiring a different way of notation to better represent it, then you're probably better off to segment it that way.
Okay. Ken, does that answer your question?
Yes or no? Basically, maybe let me to take the example, just like from the logical data architecture perspective, we are going to adopt, say, the industry standard data model, and we are going to adopt the enterprise data model in logical, and based on this logical data model, and somehow we need the project team to implement it, right? And the project team, they will acquire the third-party application which they are in a different data model, and we do allow it. But the point is that somehow we may need to understand how fit the application data model with our SIEM model or the enterprise data model. Somehow we may need to have the mapping between these two of the model, and and therefore before the application team, they're going to introduce the new application, and we will ask them to provide the mapping in making sure that the application data model really can fit and provide those information that fulfill the enterprise data model. In case they don't, and at least they have to highlight on which of the area they don't fulfill the requirement. And that's why somehow that kind of a mapping between two of the data model have to be exist in somewhere, so that people can take a look on the mapping and understand where and how this information are being implemented.
Okay, yeah. So what you would have would be at some level you would have the components synchronized between the different tools. So you would have Abacus at one level, and then you would have a detailed level which is not of interest for enterprise design at a lower level. But yeah, this again gets back to.
Sorry, but how about if we request the application team, they provide the logical data model of their application instead of the physical one? Would it be also be able to document into here?
You could do the logical data model. You could do both within Abacus. So it depends what sort of information that you require. So it's a bit difficult to answer at the moment because I'm trying to understand sort of exactly what the scenario is. But yes, you can do the detailed data design within Abacus. So that would be adding more components. What I'm wondering though, when you mentioned that you're using another tool, is that whether it's providing other functionality, richer functionality that Abacus doesn't provide. So in which case you could either do an API between the two applications again, or you have the part of your. So this gets back to the previous question: is that you have the synchronization like from a system viewpoint, and also you have it from a governance viewpoint. So the system viewpoint is whether you're passing data between the two applications to try and keep them synchronized. The governance viewpoint is that, say, if you're using a TOGAF ADM, for example, part of the governance in phase 3 would be to ensure that the deliverables from the project is complying with the requirements established at the higher level architecture design.
Okay.
But in the reality, how the other company in connecting the actual architecture with the actual implementation. I mean, if we define the architecture in the two, which is the logical, and somehow in the actual implementation, they may have something implement in the physical, and somehow if they are not being connected, and how this information be governed.
Yeah, so with the with the information there, it depends on because we can have the physical components modeled within Abacus, as I mentioned. So I don't know whether in this case whether we've got an example of some of the data components there.
Maybe we will take this through email. So I will work with Ken and you to see. Yes, because we have some other questions that we will want to answer. Want to get an answer. Yeah. There are two questions by Jane in the chat. Can you take a look at it?
Okay. All right.
Chat. Where's the chat?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, there.
Yeah. Okay. So, right. Okay. Okay. On Victor's point, can you show how different scenarios can be versioned and used for comparison? Okay. Yep. All right. So there's different. I'll show you how to do the versioning of that. So what we can do within the architectures. So there's different ways of doing it. We can do different architectures, which would be different scenarios. So we use that in terms of our ideation, or we can use it for road mapping. So, for example, if I show you this architecture here, so we have this production architecture, and underneath that, I've got some transitional architectures, which which take us to a target state. So what I can do with that, with the architectures themselves, we're capturing different properties of that architecture. So we might look at cost, and we might look at performance. So this is where we normally use our algorithms to build and measure the performance of the architectures. So what I can do is that I can, for example, if I wanted to do a quick comparison, I could do a chart, for example, and I could do a line chart, and I could say I could look at the performance of the architecture over time. So I could look at these 5 architectures, so going from production to target, and I might look at some of the properties of that. So say I'd been completing some KPIs for this project. So I've got risk, impact, and complexity and performance. What I can do then is that I could chart that, so I could see then that how the risk is going to track over as we go from production to target. So the risk is going to drop off in horizon 2. The probability will drop off fairly quickly. The complexity of the architectures is actually going to get worse before it improves, and that might be because if we're replacing applications, at some stage we're going to have the old applications and the new applications running at the same time. So our environment's actually going to get more complex before we're able to transition off the old applications. So this is where we can show things over a period of time. We could also do comparisons between different architectures. So, for example, if I went back to our enterprise here, and we had a look at the architecture application diff. So here I can do charts here, and I can show how what the costs are going to look like between different architectures. So this is the cost as of 2017, and this is the overall cost. And so I can use the different properties and metrics that we've gathered along the way to compare different architectures, or to compare architectures at different points in time. And that's where very important, because when we're proposing different solutions, we can use the metrics to try and show what are the differences between architectures. The other thing that we can also do is, at any time, is that I can do comparisons between architectures and see what has changed between architectures. So if I come on my production as is, and I change that to another architecture, so I've got this ideation template, or maybe I'll use the production as is to 2018 actual. So what I can do then is I can then run a diff sync, and I can ask it to compare the different architectures, and it will go through and will tell me all of the things that have changed between different architectures. In this case, there's quite a lot of changes, but it's going through down to the actual property level of different components, to saying, well, this is in one architecture, the the total cost of ownership for capabilities was 9 million. In this architecture, it's 5 million. So that's where you can do quite detailed comparisons between architectures, and quite often that can lead into identifying what are the gaps between architectures that that the projects are going to form up and address.
How are these costs of ownership being captured and aggregated in the tools? So,
Okay.
so is it some kind of properties that we create and then we feed information in through API, or we need to set up some kind of logic to aggregate these kind of figures?
Okay, so I'll show you two different things. There's two different ways of doing that. So we do have a financial complexity algorithm, and what it does is, if I just go in and show you a component, for example. So if I went into a okay, so if we went into an application. Okay, so have a look at the website. And if I have a look at the properties of that, so you can see that when I come down to, I'll just collapse these, sorry. We'll have a look at the financial ones. So at the moment, we have these properties here where we can input, and this is already set up, so you just plug in the numbers, the CapEx for the amount of support that an application requires, the lifespan and how long it's been installed for, and the OPEX. And if we use those figures, then what it will do, it will go through and it will generate the total cost of ownership for that component. Now, what it will also do is, and how it's set up within the meta model, the standard meta model configuration, is that it will attribute costs between the model as well. So in this case, for this application, it's got a total cost per year of 236,000, although that's varying slightly. But it's also picking up attributed costs. So this would be costs of things like servers and operating systems underneath it that are actually being attributed up to the application. So these are automatically set up to actually attribute costs up through the model. The other way of doing it is this visual composer, which we were sort of looking at, we started to look at before. So with this composer, this allows you to write a script visually. So what I can do here is that I could say, get a component. So from the architecture, say from my production, give me my applications. I can then get a property. So from the application, get me the financial, let's see, get the OPEX cost. And what I want to do then is that I can attribute that cost, and I could get the sum of those and send it up to the parent of a capability. So what that is doing is that it's going through the applications, getting that cost, and it's sending it up and attributing it up to the capability. And I can ask it to store that in a particular property on the. So I'd use a financial, and I'd have I could use a CapEx, OPEX, monetary fixed there. So what it's doing is getting all the application costs and sending them up and attributing to the capability. So you can set those up quite easily as well. And we do have some sample ones that are there. So for example, we have 5-year budgets.
Okay. Okay.
And
sorry. Can you take a look at the chat again? I think we still have a few more questions to go through, so we need to keep it short.
Yep. Okay. So so basically you can set those up fairly easily to do your cost attribute or any other analysis that you want to do.
Okay.
Okay. So
yeah.
Tool support entity modeling through it to do capacity planning. Okay, so you want to have a look at that. So with the entity modeling, so we can show with the components here. So let's see if I have a look at the diagrams and have a look at the applications here. So if we look at the information, so we can set up sort of the different entity relationship diagrams within that. So this is within the model, everything is stored within objects, and you use viewpoints to actually show how information is going to be rendered within the in a diagram. So we just tell it, for example, what this data entity. So that's a data entity, how that is going to appear. We can also have information on the actual connection. So for example, this entity relationship diagram, we can change the CAPENs to use the entity relationship diagram sort of way of showing the one-to-many type relationships, and these also can be changed dynamically. So if I wanted to change that from one-to-many to one-to-one, then you can see that the CAPENs have changed to reflect that. Now, once we have all this, so we have these entities, and we've gone down to physical. So we've got the data characters and things like that. We can use that to there are scripts that we can use to create database sizing types things, and we can, I think there's also some scripts to generate some data type information to use to create the physical data stores. So I don't know whether I've quite got an example of that one there at the moment, but yeah, we can do some basic stuff with that.
Okay. Maybe we'll move on
we'll
to the next
move
question.
on to that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So, right. How is cost of ownership being captured and aggregated? I think we sort of covered that.
Yes, we went through that. Yes.
Okay. What other impact assessment can be done? Yeah, there's lots of impact assessments that you can do. So so you can use the algorithms to go through and look at the differences between different changes. You can actually do queries within the model. So if I, for example, if I wanted to come in on a new diagram, and let's see, I'll do a solution diagram, and I'll use my production as is. So what I can do here is that I can go into a diagram and go into open element selection. So I could come into a particular server. So I'll just click this one, for example, and I can show what's attached to that server. So I can see what is, it has an is-hosted at connection. So if I click on that, I can see the applications that's connected to it. I could see what uses that. So that's the process. So I could use that to see that for this server that it's running 2 applications, and these are how it is used. Then I can go back and I could continue with that, and I could have a look at any other impacted by. So are there any projects that are impacting that? So I can just, again, exploring the connections within your meta model between the different components. So there's lots of different impact assessment that you can do. So you can use it an algorithm based by looking at the nature of change. You can use diagrams to actually explore how are things connected. So you know, I could follow through my meta model to see. So for example, if we're using this meta model, I could come here from a data entity. I could see for that data entity what application is using it. I could see what process uses that that application, what capability it's supporting, and what business objectives that that it is supporting. So that way I can trace back that information throughout the model. So I can run things like costs or any. So, for example, I had one customer who was interested in the platform services. So this is the databases, operating systems. They were interested to see what was the general health of those. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I think we should move on to the last two questions.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yes, so, but yeah, we understand that there are a lot of the different templates here, that you showed.
Yeah. Okay. So if Model 1 solution architecture is working on the landscape, how can the tool aggregate the 2B picture? Right, the 2B picture. How does the tool handle areas of overlap where one system may get hit multiple times by different projects? Okay, so what we can do with that is generally with the projects, we combine them all into a single a sort of operational type architecture, and that is so that we can start to look at the interdependencies between projects. So, for example, if we had a look at the some of the matrices here, we could have a look at the project interdependencies. So if I have a look on that, I can see that this single customer view project, right at the intersection, these are all of the components that are impacted by that project. But I can also see from this that the cybersecurity project is also impacting on the very same components. So that way that there are interdependencies between the projects. So I can see that if there's a change or if there's a delay in the single customer view project, that there's going to be an impact on the cybersecurity project, or it might be a chance to collaborate. So that's another way of checking how the interdependencies between projects. But what we do is that the operational architecture is everything that we're currently working on at the moment. So we have stuff that's in production, we have stuff that's in development that we're working on, but we need to keep a track of them so that we can manage the interdependencies and the impacts between those components, so that we know that an impact on one component will have an impact on another project. So the other question, so hopefully, if more than one solution architecture is working on the landscape, how can the tool aggregate? Oh, no, that's one we saw. Okay. So how does the tool handle areas of overlaps with one system? Yeah, that's okay. How does the tool support security architecture design? So with the security architecture, generally, security architecture relates to perhaps different types of components. So you might add some component types that are linked to other components. So you might have security controls, for example. And the other thing is that you might have different properties which will which are of interest to security architects. So then you might look at quite often we get asked around security relating to data security, and so we're looking at things like the privacy levels in particular is a common one used by security architects, and they want to see for what is the privacy level of certain data and where is it used within the what applications are using it, and how are they protected. So again, the security architecture is still just an addition to, it's the same thing. We're still looking at components and connections, but we might have some different components that are now of interest to us, and we will certainly have some different properties which we'll want to capture for those components to be able to answer those questions. But we can set up the security architecture to support that. Okay, so okay, so I think, is there any other questions that we've got at the moment, or?
Is there any questions from the floor?
This is a follow-up on the security architecture.
Yes.
expect the tool to actually capture things like network architectures and the firewall configurations, configurations between applications, like things?
What you could do is one thing with the with Abacus, because it's using this graph database, is that connections between components are actually you can have properties on connections. So what you could do, for example, with you know, an accesses type connection, is that you could set up different different properties. So you might you could set up different properties to capture the nature of the of that connection. So what we often get is for things like interfaces, for example. I know it's not quite data architecture, but we often capture sort of what are the protocols of that interface, what data is being passed across that architecture, what is the timing, what is the security of that. So it depends what sort of information that you want to capture, but certainly we can do that on using the connection. And bearing in mind that within Abacus, a component, so two applications can be joined by multiple interfaces, which is fairly typical because you might use different protocols and different data and different timing of different interfaces. So you can have multiple interfaces to support that. So what you would need for security is to be able to identify what is the information that you're interested in, and you could start to capture that on the interfaces connection, and then you could then query that, and you could sort of do queries and filter on different different properties of a connection, for example. So you could say, show me all of the high-risk data connections within the interfaces, and it would it could do that for you. So I think I'll have a very quick look at the, I'll do a new catalog to see if there's any examples of the, so what I would do would have a look at the interfaces connection, and I would see if there's any, I'm not sure what properties are actually on this, but certainly standards would be. Okay, so on this, we're able to see that for the interfaces that there is some information relation to the stage, to the recommendation for the interfaces. In this one, there's information on bandwidth, but you could put security information. So you're able to then, once you have this information, you can start to, you know, query and use that to answer different different questions.
Okay. Okay. I am thinking we are wrapping up here. So any last questions from the floor? Okay. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Thank you, Sean.
So,
thank you, Zach.
Yeah, so with those other questions, yeah, if you want to send them over in a bit more detail about what you're actually looking for, and we can give you a more accurate answer on that rather than sort of more of a hypothetical sort of scenario.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys. We'll also send through a copy of the recording and a copy of the new slide deck. Thanks, Peter, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.